Thank you for listening to the show on Really Big Something Channel. November 13th, 2017.
The Kuhner Report, presented by Kelly Financial Services. This is the Kuhner Report.
Have we now become like the Roman Empire? I've got some unbelievable stories. The United States is now setting up permanent, not temporary, permanent bases in Israel. They want to do it in Turkey, in Kurdistan, all across the Middle East. We're going to discuss that later on in the show. But first, should Judge Roy Moore step aside? In fact, it's the Kuhner Country poll question of the day, sponsored by Bill Kelly Financial Services. And so let me ask all of you, before I even give my monologue, what do you think about Judge Roy Moore in the wake of the allegations that he engaged in sexual misconduct with allegedly 4 women, 3 of whom were 16, 17, 18. He dated them. Apparently he kissed them. It was allegedly consensual. But the 14-year-old Lee Korfman, who told the Washington Post that he inappropriately touched and fondled her and essentially sexually assaulted her. Should Roy Moore, who's now running to be the U.S. Senator from Alabama to replace Jeff Sessions, should this Republican step aside? If you believe the answer is yes, text the letter A to 680-680. If you believe the answer is no, it's a political smear job, text the letter B to 680-680. As always, you can vote online at WRKO.com. Okay, my friends, this bombshell dropped Friday afternoon. It is now everywhere, and I mean everywhere. The Washington Post apparently found 4 women who they say now accuse Judge Moore of inappropriate sexual conduct. In particular, one of them, Lee Korfman, says when she was 14 years old, this was about 40 years ago, she says that Roy Moore picked her up at a courthouse when her mother was going in to do something, got her phone number, called her, she agreed to go out on a date with him, and then he took her to his apartment or house, and that's where he apparently told her to take her clothes off. She says he then fondled her and inappropriately touched her. When asked, he went on Sean Hannity's radio program. When asked about these allegations, Judge Roy Moore said they are complete garbage. This is fake news, and it's nothing more than a desperate attempt by the Washington Post, his arch-liberal enemy, to bring him down and deny him his election victory in December. Roll cut 1, Brittany.
I don't know Miss Korfman from anybody. I've never talked to her, never had any contact with her. Allegations of sexual misconduct with her are completely false. I believe they're politically motivated. I believe they're brought only to stop a very successful campaign, and that's what they're doing. I've never known this woman or anything.
In other words, he vehemently denies it. In fact, he so vehemently denies it, apparently he's going to be suing or announcing a lawsuit later today. Now, Gloria Allred, the feminist liberal Democrat lawyer, one of the most notorious ambulance chasers in the country, now says that she's going to bring out a new accuser later this afternoon. So it's obvious now that the Democrats and the liberal media and the Rhino establishment are out to destroy this man. There's no question about it. This is a political hit job. Here is my opinion, and then I want all of you to weigh in. 617-266-6868. First of all, I want you to just objectively think about this. Whatever you think of Judge Roy Moore's politics, whether you like or don't like, this man has been the most prominent public figure in Alabama for the last 4 decades. Everybody in Alabama knows him. And I mean everybody. He has waged numerous campaigns. He has had multiple investigations against him. Remember, he was once the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. He has been investigated by all kinds of committees. Never once did these allegations ever surface. So in 40 years of an incredibly public career, not one word. In fact, contrary to the lies in the Washington Post, they say there were rumors. There were never rumors. Ever. That Roy Moore inappropriately harassed or assaulted women or engaged in any kind of inappropriate sexual conduct. So I want you to think about this. On the eve of an absolutely critical election in which Roy Moore, a staunch Trump conservative, but even more importantly, somebody who virulently opposes the establishment, who is committed to draining the swamp, and he is a real deal. You ask him, he wants to indict Hillary. You ask him, he is against amnesty. He is against open borders. He wants to send politicians to jail. He wants to clean up all the corruption in Washington. In fact, he wants to break up Amazon. As well, by the way, as Google or Microsoft or all of these huge tech giants who have a de facto monopoly. Well, who owns the Washington Post? Amazon. So here you have somebody who is 4 weeks away from an electrifying election victory that would set the table for Bannon's war against the establishment, the ultimate insurgent candidate, and all of a sudden, Shazam! There's this story in the Washington Post. All of a sudden, with the Harvey Weinstein allegations, with Hollywood now flooded with accusations, all of a sudden, they come out of the woodwork. Suddenly now, Judge Roy Moore effectively is a pedophile. Now, furthermore, so the timing to me is incredibly suspicious. Furthermore, I want you to think about this. The Washington Post sends one reporter to cover Roy Moore. According to this reporter, if you read the story, he's just talking to these Republicans in the crowd, and they're all whispering among themselves, hey, did you hear? Oh, he was dating an 18-year-old. Oh, he was dating a 17-year-old. Oh, that 14-year-old. Oh, he took her to the house. Oh, my God, the guy had his way with her. Oh, he's a rapist. He's a pedophile. He's a pig. They don't know each other. None of these 4 women that have so far come out, none of them know each other. But this Washington Post reporter knows all of them. Somehow he was able to find all 4 of them, no problem. As if somebody, I don't know, a Democratic operative put their names and phone numbers down on a list and says, these are the women you want to call. Lee Corfman, the 14-year-old, should be at the top of your list. Call him. Give him that robo call. You give him that call. You expect me to believe that? That this was just serious, enterprising reporting? I don't believe it. I don't believe it. Now, further important points now need to be revealed. It has now come out that this woman, Lee Corfman, has repeatedly accused pastors in Alabama of apparently sexually molesting her, or sexual misconduct, or having sexually assaulted her. So she now has a history of accusing people. Apparently everybody is assaulting this woman. I've never seen a woman get assaulted like this. So apparently she's been claiming for years that all kinds of pastors, everybody's been having their way with her. The same woman who admitted that at the time she met Roy Moore was seriously into drugs, was an alcoholic who engaged in massive drinking binges, who was incredibly promiscuous, her admission, I mean, I'm not smearing her character, that's what she admits, who had numerous boyfriends. Then she went on and had 3 divorces, multiple bankruptcies. The question I want to know is this. How much did the Washington Post pay her? I want to know this. Was she paid to give that interview? Because the mother of Lee Korfman has now admitted that her daughter never wanted to go public, ever. It was the Washington Post who contacted her and through multiple interviews essentially twisted her arm and said, come on, you gotta go public. Come on. You could kill this guy in the election. Come on. Now, that's the very opposite of my experience with women who have been sexually assaulted or raped or whatever, the victim of sexual harassment. Take Paula Jones. Take Juanita Broderick. Take Kathleen Willey. I could go on. They are itching to talk. They can't wait to talk. They can't wait to get their story out. This one, you almost had to twist her arm into telling her story. Now we're also finding out that parts of her story are starting to fall apart. She adamantly insists in the Post story, again and again and again, that Roy Moore had called her to pick her up on dates where the man took her and then, inappropriately touched her, okay? But that the calls went through the bedroom, in her bedroom. Well, the mother now has to admit that she never had a phone, the Lee Korfman, the daughter, never had a phone in her bedroom. So now parts of her story are being made up. But let me even get to a deeper point. I was 14, 34 years ago. When I was 14, much of it is vague. I'm telling you right now, much of it is vague. For her to be able to recall with such crystal clarity every minute detail of what happened 40 years ago, I don't believe it. When she's a known drug addict and she's a known alcoholic who was drinking and using drugs at the time, I don't believe it. I do not believe it. So Roy Moore is asked point blank, what about these other girls, 17, 18? Did you date them? Listen to his response. Roll it, Brittany.
At that time in your life, let me ask you this. You do remember these girls. Would it be unusual for you as a 32-year-old guy to have dated a woman as young as 17? That would be a, 15-year difference, or a girl 18. Do you remember dating girls that young at that time?
Not generally, no. If I did, I'm not going to dispute anything, but I don't remember anything like that.
Anyway, generally, no. Okay, let me tell you what that means. What that means is he probably did date them, had 1 or 2 dates, 17, 18. The age of consent, sexual consent in Alabama is 16. The women themselves admit that nothing inappropriate happened. In fact, they said he was an absolute gentleman. That he asked the parents' permission to date those girls. They gave him. This is the Deep South. This was 40 years ago. It was quite common in that time, I'm just telling you facts, historical facts, for men to establish a certain career or a profession, and then in their late 20s or early 30s to say, okay, now that I've established myself, it's time to get married. And they would prefer much younger women, to be candid, because they wanted to have large families. So in the South at the time, it was very common for, say, a 28, 29, 30-year-old man to date somebody who's 17, 18, 19. So today we would obviously find that despicable. Society's standards have changed. At the time, this was very common in Alabama. The key accusation is that of Lee Korfman, the 14-year-old. And I don't believe it. This is, to me, clearly a plot. I'm choosing my words very carefully. A coordinated attempt by the Rhino establishment, the Democrats, and the liberal media to destroy a genuine conservative populist and a genuine conservative insurgent. And now Mitch McConnell has called for Roy Moore to step aside. John McCain has called for Roy Moore to step aside. Peter King of New York has called for Roy Moore to step aside. The Republican Party is now demanding that Roy Moore step aside. My question to you is, should he? I say, hell no. What do you say? 617-266-6868. Your calls next.
I do not remember speaking to a civics class. I don't remember that. I do not remember when I seem to remember knowing her parents. That they were friends. I can't recall specific dates because that's been 40 years, but I remember her as a good girl. But neither of them have ever stated any inappropriate behavior.
He's talking about one of the 18-year-olds that said, yes, Roy Moore and her did date for 2 or 3 dates or whatever, and she even admits that her parents said yes, and she says nothing inappropriate happened. In fact, he was a perfect gentleman. However, the accusations from Lee Korfman, the 14-year-old, now have rocked the political establishment. Mitch McConnell, who was saying if it's true he should resign, has now changed his tune to he now should step aside. Roll it, Brittany.
Or do you believe these allegations to be true?
I believe the women, yes.
And now Mitch McConnell has now come out and said Roy Moore should step aside and let the establishment rhino who he defeated in the primary take his place, Luther Strange. Should Judge Moore give way, or should he fight to the last breath in his body? Vinny in Georgia. Go ahead, Vinny.
Jeff, my friend, how are you?
Vinny, my buddy. How are you, Vinny?
Pretty good. I had my checkup last month, and I'm good for another 10,000 miles.
Well, you sound great, my friend. Tell me, what do you think about Judge Moore?
Thank you. Well, here's my feeling about it. No, he should not step down. He should not relinquish his nomination for the Republican Party. We certainly need to hold on to that seat. Now, you were talking about how someone could recall something 40 years ago. Jeff, I don't know. I don't remember what I had for dinner last Friday night. I can't remember. And with regard to sexual consent in Alabama, I have to, sometimes I have to wonder, even today, that the sexual consent is actually 12 years old in Alabama.
Thank you. Thank you for that call, Vinny. No, I mean, look, I think this is clearly a political partisan witch hunt. The establishment hates him. The Republican establishment, the rhinos. He beat them in the primary. The Democrats loathe him. They fear him. And the very same Washington Post, they are the ones who went after Roy Moore's wife. Then they went after his foundation. Then they claimed that he didn't pay taxes when he did. They've endorsed his opponent, Doug Jones. They are doing everything in their power to destroy this man. And so now they have drudged up from the bottom of the gutter this most slanderous of smears. And what I find incredible is look how the Republicans wither in the face of any media or mainstream media attacks. Look how quick they cave and surrender, because they are just as desperate to get rid of him as the Democrats. Ron in Walpole, you're up next. Go ahead, Ron.
Jeff, I find this accusation really suspect. Let me tell you why. Where were they in the primary?
Nowhere.
Nowhere. Okay? All right. Now, they come out when he's about to win the election. It's a last desperate act of the Democrats. And this comes right from the DNC and the devil.
And, Ron, I hate to say this, I think the RNC and Mitch McConnell I think there's clear collusion here. Look, I think what happened is the rhinos don't want him. The Democrats don't want him. The Washington media doesn't want him. And so they basically, look at it, it's all coordinated. So we run the story, the Democrats then smash him, and then the Republicans will pile on. And eventually put enough pressure on this guy that he just basically caves, collapses, and gives way. My friends, it's time to say enough is enough. Roy Moore, this is now a time of your testing. Stand up and say no. Here I stand. I can do no other. Let's take it to Jackie Murphy. 12:37 here on the great WRKO. Okay, my friends, pressure now intensifies for Judge Roy Moore to step aside from the Alabama U.S. Senate race. He and a Democrat are now vying to replace Jeff Sessions' seat. Jeff Sessions, obviously now is Attorney General, and so that paved the way for an opening. Roy Moore successfully beat the Mitch McConnell-backed establishment Republican Luther Strange. And so now the Washington Post, 4 weeks before the election, dropped a bombshell alleging that Roy Moore had inappropriate sexual contact, they say, with 4 women. 3 of the women were either 17 or 18. All 3 of them say they went on several dates with Roy Moore. 2 of them say he never touched them at all. One says there was a kiss or 2 kisses or whatever. All of them say he asked their parents if he could take them out. They said yes. They say he was a perfect gentleman. He took them to a pizzeria or to a movie theater or whatever, and that nothing happened. Couple of dates, didn't work. He moved on. They moved on. The age, by the way, of sexual consent in Alabama is 16. So if you know anything about American society, but especially the South 40 years ago, it was extremely common for men in their late 20s, early 30s to date women considerably younger, 10, 12, even 15 years younger. So how is that inappropriate? I mean, by today's standards, yes, it's inappropriate, but by standards of 40 years ago, it wasn't. So those 3 women, I don't see what the scandal is, even if they're true. Okay? So there's no scandal. The only one that's potentially a dangerous, a real scandal, and that is a crime, would be the allegations of a Lee Korfman, who says that at the age of 14, Roy Moore took her to his house and inappropriately fondled and touched her. That's what she says. Now, for 40 years, she has said nothing. For 40 years, you would think if this guy has a thing for young kids, if he's a pedophile, you think she'd be the only one? The thing about pedophiles is they can't stop themselves. And so you're going to try to tell me a man with an illustrious 40-year career, the most known and polarizing figure in Alabama, who's been involved in countless campaigns, and for 40 years, nobody says anything until 4 weeks before an election? I don't believe it. This very same woman has also accused numerous pastors of inappropriate sexual misconduct with her. So apparently Roy Moore is not the only one that's been inappropriately assaulting her. She's been accusing others of this kind of behavior. She admits at the time, and for much of her teenage years, she was a drug addict. She was an alcoholic. She was extremely promiscuous. And so the question now is, do you believe her or do you believe Roy Moore? I believe Roy Moore. Listen now to John Kasich. Roll it, Brittany.
Look, you have some corroboration, and we're not talking now about convicting somebody of some criminal offense. It's just really a matter as to whether he ought to be the candidate, the standard bearer of the Republican Party. And I just think he shouldn't be, and I hope that the people of Alabama, the party officials, will look at it again. But this is not about Obama or left wing. I just don't believe that it is, and I'm saddened by it. I mean, I'm the father of two twin daughters, and I just think it's inappropriate, and I would like it if he stepped aside.
But you also tweeted that the GOP must not support him.
Yeah, I don't think they should. I mean, I think he should step aside on this. He can continue to defend himself, but I think at the end the party ought not to be for this and give somebody else a chance.
Why? Notice this rush to judgment. Notice whatever happened to the presumption of innocence. Here it's the opposite. He's guilty until proven innocent. So you have an allegation, an unproven allegation. In fact, her story, as I said, is beginning to come apart. And all of a sudden now, because of one allegation, I said, forget the 17, 18-year-olds. That's nothing. Okay, those are not disqualifications. So the question is, you're going to rely on the word of one woman from a liberal rag like the Washington Post who is determined to destroy Judge Roy Moore? So basically now the standard is this, because you now have Kasich calling him to step down. You now have McConnell calling him to step down. You now have John McCain calling him to step down. So according to them, the Washington Post can make or break you. According to them, one allegation, only one, doesn't have to even be proven. And boom, your career is over. So let me tell you right now, really, to all the libs, you want to get me? Guys, find one woman, pay her $1,000 or give her a shot of heroin, whatever she wants, and have her run to the Boston Globe and say, Jeff Kuhner, when I was 15 or 16 or whatever, Jeff Kuhner touched me in the you-know-where. That's it. You get me off the air, no problem. One woman, one allegation, no evidence, my career is finished. Is this the kind of America we want to have? This stinks. It stinks to high heaven because the swamp is afraid that this guy is going to help Trump finish the job and drain it. And so now it's destroy this guy at all costs. And the question now is this: where does Roy Moore get his reputation back? Latest polls now show it's a dead heat. According to Bloomberg, his rival Doug Jones has now overtaken Roy Moore. His 11-point lead is gone. 617-266-6868. Andy in Nebraska. Go ahead, Andy.
Hey, Jeff. First of all, those polls are about as fake as a $3 bill, but so the one that is a crime, Lee Kaufman waited 40 years to come out about it. I mean, let's compare this. One of my closest friends is a victim of child molestation, and he's 16, as am I. He went to the police at 13, for God's sake. For God's sake. Why did it take 4 decades to come out about this? Sorry, Jeff. This just drives me crazy.
Well, I mean, you're completely right, Andy. And look, it's so obviously fake, and it's such an obvious political witch hunt. But look at the game that they play in Washington. The Post comes up with a BS hit job piece. The Democrats and the media pounce all over it, and there are the rhinos waiting. And they look at the poll numbers, and they go, let's pounce. And so now Roy Moore has become completely and utterly isolated, and the pressure is now growing for him to step down. Again, an election has been nullified by the elites. Again, a conservative populist outsider is being maligned, libeled, and slandered. And again, the rhinos run for the hills. Jay in Lexington. Go ahead, Jay.
Hey, Jeff, just 3 quick points. LBJ had a famous line: accuse your opponent of having sex with farm animals, even though you know it's not true. He's going to have to spend the rest of the campaign defending himself. That's point number one. Point number two, I don't remember when McCain ran against Obama, but it came out that he didn't tell his wife that he was actually 17 years older than her until she was engaged. She didn't even know that. And the third point, Gloria Allred's coming out with something this afternoon. Her daughter a couple of weeks was exposed as a phony, Lisa Bloom. She was going to spill the beans on Rose McGowan's sexual behavior to offset what she was saying about Weinstein, Harvey Weinstein. So I mean, he's got to fight back. I mean, this is just a vicious smear campaign.
No, I'm with you, Jay. Now, he says he's not going to back down, and I hope he doesn't. And he's going to have the fight of his life. But you're not going to believe what the next plan is. This is going to be at 105, okay? You are not. They're already preparing in case Roy Moore wins. You are not going to believe what they have in store for Roy Moore if he even manages to surmount all of these smears, libels, and defamations. You're not going to believe it. So it's obvious they fear him. Okay? He's a judge. He's basically a sheriff. He's going to clean up all the corruption in Washington. And this guy can never, Mr. Smith goes to Washington. Judge Moore goes to Washington. In this case, Judge Moore can never go to Washington because this guy is going to expose all of the stinking corruption. So now the famous phrase that LBJ said is, say somebody sleeps with pigs. And then they have to deny it. Well, they didn't accuse him of sleeping with pigs. They accused him of fondling a 14-year-old girl. In this modern day and age, it's the worst thing you can accuse somebody of. Smear him and watch everybody like sheep denounce him. That's their strategy. Glenn on the 128. Go ahead, Glenn.
Jeff, how you doing?
Good. How are you, Glenn?
Good, thank you. Jeff, this happened 40 years ago. Who knows? I mean, the timing is terrible, obviously. It's very suspect. But this is a perfect example of the corruption in Washington on both sides. And if Trump does anything in 4 years, I would love it if he could just cut down the term limits. That would cut out half the corruption in Washington.
Well, that's the other thing, Glenn. Look, Roy Moore supports term limits. Roy Moore, I could run down the whole issue. He supports building a wall. He supports deporting all illegal aliens. He supports cracking down on sanctuary cities. Roy Moore has said, I will not be bought by the Chamber of Commerce. NAFTA, gone. Free trade with China, gone. The big tech companies, Amazon, he wants to break them up. Google, he wants to break them up. Facebook, Microsoft, he wants to break them up. So, who owns the Washington Compost? Okay, as my good friend Mark Levin puts it. Or as I like to call it, the Washington, POS. Just take out the T. The Washington piece of, that's what it is. Okay, the Washington Post. Let's just call it the Washington Post. Who owns it? Jeff Bezos. Roy Moore gets in there and exposes all of the nefarious, incestuous relationship between these politicians and the big tech companies, and how they have a de facto monopoly, and they're lining their pockets to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. Jeff Bezos told the Washington Post, pick them out. This was a political hit job. Except this time, they're all in on it. The liberal media, the Democrats, Amazon, and the Rhino Republicans. 617-266-6868. You want to talk about David versus Goliath? This is it.
WRKO.
Bruce, you're up next. Go ahead, Bruce.
Hey, Jeff.
Hey, Bruce.
And I love you in a non-sexual way, too, but I cheated on you this weekend, and I listened to another radio talk show host. And he read the Alabama election law on air. And the Alabama election law doesn't allow for any changes to a ballot 6 weeks prior to an election. The Washington Compost released the stories 4 days after that deadline. You don't think there's collusion there?
Oh, there's definite collusion. There's definite collusion. And what the rhinos are now saying is no matter what, this is coming now from McConnell, from John McCain, from all of them. I could run down Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Jeff Flake. They're saying now that they want Republicans in Alabama to write in Luther Strange. They want to write him in. The guy that lost to Roy Moore, the Republican who lost, thereby splitting the Republican vote or denying Roy Moore the votes that he needs to win, thereby allowing the Democrat to win. So now you have the Republicans. By the way, they've only got 52 seats. They're willing now to sacrifice one seat, make it 51, razor-thin majority, just to keep Roy Moore out of the Senate. That shows you what a threat they feel this man is. Paul in Dorchester. Go ahead, Paul.
Jeff, good morning. If you're not going to say it, Jeff, I'm going to say it. The Hollywood cesspool, the liberal cesspool, who are being accused of all sorts of sexual assaults and misconduct, it's drying up the campaign donation of the Democratic Party. So all these people are being asked to return funds. They're not doing it, Jeff. That's my first point. So this is why I think they're retaliating this way against conservatives. Second point, Jeff, real quick, is why do the rhinos always fall on their own swords, Jeff? They're always apologizing and wanting everyone to resign before they let the kitten out of the bag, before you know any kind of shred of evidence. The last time I remember, Christopher Lee, Congressman Christopher Lee from New York, he sent a shirtless picture of himself trying to hook up with a woman, and everyone ran him out of Washington. I mean, like, these guys, you know, they don't want a Montana congressman like Greg Girafanti. They don't want fighters. They don't want Roy Moore. They don't want guys who fight with brass knuckles, Jeff. They want the little mittens, the little, you know, powder puff, like Mitt, who goes along, get along kind of guys. Well, we need to fight.
Paul, you nailed it. Brilliant. You said it. They want people who will go along to get along. It's about the cartel. It's about keeping the venal, corrupt system entrenched. So, you don't just have Mitch McConnell now calling for Roy Moore to step aside, or John Kasich, or John McCain, or I can run down. You even have Mitt Romney. Speaking of mittens, Mitt Romney has now called for Roy Moore to step aside. In other words, guilty as charged. Guilty without a trial. Guilty without even having a chance to clear your name. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Because Roy Moore's real crime is that he wants to drain the swamp. So even if he wins, listen to this, they're now making preparations even if Roy Moore should win. That story next. Don't touch that dial.
The voice of Boston is you. 680 WRKO Boston, 93.7 WEEI HD2 Lawrence, Boston. It's 1 o'clock.